This is a CNIB Lake Joe at Home program. CNIB Lake Joe at Home logo, image description, an illustration of a marshmallow roasting in a campfire with a roof in the background.
My name's John O'Brien. I made myself a few notes here. I'm 58 years old. I got five kids. Two of my kids have been certified scuba divers. My wife is a certified scuba diver. My wife actually hasn't dove in about 12 years as she got the bends when we were in Cozumel, and I can talk about that a little bit more, and spent a day or so in a recompression chamber in Cozumel that extended our stay. Instead of 2 weeks, I think we ended up staying 3.5. That was about 12 years ago. Anyways, I got bitten by the diving bug. I grew up in the lake in Aurelia, and I've always had, an affinity to the water skiing. I remember doing slaloming, and friends around the bay and the lake had they started doing kiting off of water skis and that. I remember doing that in the mid and late 70s and as a teenager. I never really was concerned about what was going on under the water. And I spent a lot of time on top of the water. I was in the water all the time in the summertime. And, into my 20s and start having kids, and they get involved in sports. And as the kids started to get a little bit older, I was, 29, 30 years old. And I started reading some books, some adventure books, Clive Cussler, about old Spanish galleons and all sorts of different, things that happened on the sea. And I found myself attracted to anything that was about under the water, whether it was sharks and I think Shark Week was the first Shark Week was like 1997 or 1998. And, they were showing some pretty crazy stuff at that time that nobody had really ever seen before, other than maybe a National Geographic special. And I found myself, I just started reading more, and anything to do with scuba diving, but I was just so intrigued with it. I started subscribing to Rodale's scuba diving magazine, Skin Diver, started reading all these stories, but I never thought about actual diving. And then I think it was the fall of '99, I was driving along Saunders Road here in Barrie, and I see this name of a place. It's called Zero Gravity. It was a dive shop. It's no longer in business in Barrie, but they did train a lot of scuba divers at one time. And anyways, I stopped in there and I found out a little bit of information. And the more I thought about it, I went back the next day and I signed myself and my 12-year-old son up because you had to be at least 12 years old to take the course for a junior scuba course. So, and basically the training for adults and a junior scuba is virtually the same. All the math training, all of that. So if the kids can't do it, they can't really pass it. I was amazed when my son did better than I did on the exam. Which was, so when you're learning to scuba dive, taking the certificate, a lot of people have learned to dive and will learn to dive watching a video for an hour, and then their hands are held and they're taken out into a dive boat somewhere in the Caribbean, and they're told to do this, this, and this, and they go under the water all freaked out for 20 or 30 minutes, and that's their dive. What I did, I spent 44 hours in a classroom and 16 hours in a pool. That's what this company did that was based in Barrie. And the pool that we used at that time, we actually had to, when the class was over on the Sunday afternoon for, I think it was 4 weeks in a row, we'd leave at about 1:30 or 2 from Barrie, and we'd drive to Newmarket, because Newmarket actually has a diving pool that's 22 or 24 feet deep in the one end. So what you need the depth for is to get down to at least 15 or 20 feet so that you're into 1 atmospheric pressure of water. So it's a totally different, using your equipment at that depth is totally different than using it on the surface. So it's all part of the training program. So after, I remember the very first time that we went into the swimming pool, and the instructor had 7 or 8 of us standing around. There was a couple of different instructors. And the instructor came around to everybody, and we had our regulators in our mouth, and we were learning their breathing, and he took everybody's mask. We're like, okay, this is really weird. And he says, now I want everybody to close their eyes and go under the water and just sit on the bottom. We were in the shallow end of the pool. And and this is exactly what he said to us, I want you to learn to breathe like you're in your mother's womb again. So, I thought, oh, that's kind of weird. But, when I actually did it, and I've done it thousands of times, and it's such a peace and serenity thing to feel yourself breathing, you can become so much more in tune. And that's what he was really trying to teach the people, that is get comfortable with breathing underwater. There's nothing to be scared of. And they were really gently easing people into things that maybe make people apprehensive or freaked out and not want to try it again. So it was really, I look back at that now, and that instructor, it was really cool the way that he sort of, he taught everybody like they were just like a real newbie, right? So, once you do all of this training, then you're still not a certified diver. You have to do what's called checkout dives. And every place has a little bit different of a system. If they're a PADI certified agency, they should be following some fairly rigid guidelines. PADI stands for Professional Association of Dive Instructors, and it's probably, I believe it's the largest dive certification agency in the world. I know about 3 years ago, they certified their 25 millionth diver since they started certification back in the mid-90s, early 90s. So there are a few other agencies, but they're more for technical diving. NAUI, National Association of Underwater Instructors, and then that type of thing. And people get into mixed gases, that type of thing. So, but anyways, getting back to these checkout dives through the PADI agency when we were in Cozumel. So the first dive, now keep in mind, we've had all this, we've bought all this equipment. I've gone out and spent a couple $1,000s worth of equipment for my son and I. We've flown it all down to, I didn't know you could just rent it all down in Mexico for $20 a day, but no, I had to go and spend all this money. But anyways, we carted it all down there, and we're on the boats. And so the instructor that I had picked to do our checkout dives, they drop us off onto a dock that's partway down, and we're separated from the rest of the people to do these checkout dives. And the very first time I went into the water, I was 20 feet deep, looking around at my son, and I look behind my son, and I see 3 spotted eagle rays that are about 5 feet wide. Very first dive into the water. And I'm like, oh my Lord, I'm like speechless. And it was just, I was just in such an amazement, such a wonder. The clarity of the water in Cozumel is known as probably the clearest in the world. On a bad day, you have 100 feet of visibility, which is unheard of in any of these waters around here. And sometimes it's 300 or 400 feet that you can see underwater. So the first dive, after I see this, we have to do some of the training and safety things and the redundancy things to keep you safe underwater. And there's a compass that's on your regulator. And so there's some underwater directional stuff that you have to learn. Your alternate regulator, you're taking your regulator out of your mouth, you're blowing bubbles out of your mouth, you put the other regulator in, you have to purge it, make sure the water is cleaned out. So these are things that just learning the safety reactions and things that you need to build into yourself to become second nature to be a safe scuba diver and to enjoy the sport. So the second dive is similar to the first dive. You might go to a little bit deeper, 30 to 40 feet deep. You'll take your mask off underwater, and you'll learn to put your mask back on, how to clear your mask underwater. You'll lie down flat onto the ocean floor and to use your breath to lift yourself off the ocean floor and bring yourself back down to control your buoyancy. So these little techniques, and this is 20, 30 minutes underwater that you're working with the instructor, and everything is being told to you via hand signals. It's all via hand signals that you've learned beforehand. So the third dive is probably the most challenging thing, though some scuba agencies will do it on the fourth, but it's called a CISA. So it's a controlled emergency swimming ascent. And this is probably one of the most important things to learn when you're scuba diving. The number one thing to learn in scuba diving is you never stop breathing. You never, ever, ever hold your breath. If you're at 30 feet deep and you hold your breath and you come right up to the surface, you can burst your lungs. The air will expand. And I'll get more into the technical, the pressures and the expansion of air in a minute. So what the CISA does, the Controlled Emergency Swimming Ascent, it's to teach you the basic principle that when you're under pressure in water, everything is pushed together, everything's condensed, everything is, every 33 feet, you're losing 50% of the volume. So that scuba tank that was on the surface is now only half full at 33 feet deep. But you're only breathing in 50% of the air at 33 feet because your lungs are only 50% of the same size. That's one of the things that, so, and that's just something that you have to practice through to get through. But once you understand that, that principle, and the reason that I'm stumbling a little bit is because I cheat and I use a dive computer. So this dive computer tells me everything. It's telling me my heart rate. It's telling me how fast I'm breathing. It's telling me how much nitrogen is in my bloodstream. It's telling me the depth that I'm at. So those are just some of the advancements of diving that have come along in the last 20 years or so. So, but you still, if anybody thinks about diving, you still want to go through that raw technical education, and it'll make you'll appreciate the sport so much longer. So getting back to the controlled emergency swimming ascent. So you're on the bottom, you take one breath of air, you take the regulator out of your mouth, and you swim up to the surface, blowing the air out at the same time. And you watch the bubbles, and you make sure that you're not going up faster than your bubbles. First time I did this, I couldn't believe that the air just kept coming out of my mouth. 40 feet out, I mean, I breathed out for a minute and a half straight. And it just kept coming because that's the air expanding out of your lungs. So that's the reason learning that principle. We did it a couple of more times. It's a very important principle in knowing buoyancy control and what the pressure can do to the air inside your body. So. The fourth dive was a little bit challenging because if anybody knows Cozumel, there's always a lot of current in Cozumel, and that's what makes it very popular because it's called drift diving. You go into the water and you use your fins to steer because the current takes you right along. On this fourth dive, which was later that afternoon, you have to take all your equipment off underwater. Take all your equipment off. You can still breathe through your regulator, but then you put your equipment back on. So that's just something that you need to be able to do it's a redundancy factor, the backup plan, you have to do something underwater. Yeah, so these are just key things that can be expanded upon in situations if they arise underwater. The thing about diving is if you're diving, I'm also a night diver. When I dive at nighttime, I have 3 flashlights. So if the first one goes down, you have 2 backups. So diving's all about redundancy. Instead of 1 regulator, you have 2, plus I carry a pony bottle, which is the 3rd one with probably 4 breaths of air in it. So there's little things like that as you would learn the sport that you can add into your dive kit, as it's called. Probably Patty is probably the biggest diving. If you go to any resort in the Caribbean, you'll see Patty Dive International. If you get out onto the coasts, like the Atlantic coast and the Pacific coast, they're more technical divers where they're diving a mixture of reduced air or reduced oxygen, and 45 to 50% helium goes into the mix and the rest nitrogen. And the reason, and that's something almost that hard hat divers do at 1,500 feet deep. And the helium, what the helium does is you can breathe helium. The helium, it doesn't just make your voice go squeaky. Helium doesn't allow you to have the nitrogen narcosis or the cloudy thinking at great depth when you're breathing in helium into mixed gas. So I don't have a full mixed gas. I have a nitrox certification. So I have it's an enriched oxygen. So why I dive with it is that you get less tired diving on it. It's more expensive to dive with this, but there's more oxygen in it. And what it does mean when you have higher oxygen in your tank is you're really restricted. You don't want to be going below 125 or 130 feet deep. Oxygen toxicity is something that happens. And that's why they say the recreational dive limit is 130 feet. Diving more than 130 feet and you're taking a lot more risk with everything. So having said that, I certainly had to go below 130 feet a couple of times. So I've been to 158 feet on a dive in Cozumel. And I did 2 decompressions on the way up, and that was probably the last time that I'll do it. So I felt very drunk when I was down at 158 feet deep. So the rule of thumb in diving is that every 40 to 50 feet, the nitrogen in your bloodstream will make you feel like you've had 1 drink of alcohol on an empty stomach. So if you're down to 150, 200 feet deep, you're going to have like 3 or 4 drinks on an empty stomach. That's how cloudy your head feels from the nitrogen narcosis. And that's one of the other reasons that people started diving with helium, argon, and different types of mixed gases. So some of the breathing gases on those mixed dives that people do to the deep wrecks, and it'll cost you $500 to fill your scuba tank for 1 dive. So it's that's certainly a rich man's sport, that one. So once I got certified, I really got bitten, and I think I did 5 or 6 overboarding that summer and the following summer, and did the 3 Tug Harbor. I dove the SS Niagara. The SS Niagara actually sits at 160 feet at the bottom, so I just went to the top of it. It was 138 feet, and swam around the top and the little tower on it. Probably the craziest dive that I've had a chance to do is with a group of guys about 15 years ago, and these guys were all Great Lakes wreck divers, and we went down to Kingston. And in Kingston, through one of the areas of Kingston, there are the shipping lanes. There's actually cables that these scuba divers tie off to and go to the bottom of the shipping lanes while the boats go over top. So yeah, it was a thrill to hear the big propellers and to boom, boom, boom. So that was about a 15, 18-minute thrill seeker dive. That's basically what it was. So. I don't think I'll do that one again. 2003, 2004, we decided to my wife and I decided to do a dive trip and drive down to the Florida Keys. And our way down to the Florida Keys, we decided to, I think we went over to the Gainesville side. So we went south of Gainesville, and all of a sudden I started seeing scuba diving signs, and I have all the dive equipment in the car, and I'm like, what is going on here? And this is, little did I know that I'm in the heart of cave diving in the entire world. just north or just south of Gainesville, Florida, a place called Ginny Springs. If you look at a bottle of water, who is it that Coca-Cola makes? Dasani is what Coca-Cola makes. It tells you right on there, bottled at source Ginny Springs. So Ginny Springs is actually probably the largest water aquifer in the entire United States. It might even be the largest in North America. Apparently 3 billion gallons of fresh water come out of these springs a day, and they flow into the Santa Fe and the Swanee River. We came across this place called Ginny Springs, and as I got into it, I've read probably 7 or 8 books about people that have mapped the underwater cave system down there, and people have spent 4 and 5 days mapping the cave system underwater. They bring staging tanks in, 40, 50. It's just ridiculous, some of the stuff that these people do. But I had to try it. I do have my cavern certification. I don't have a cave certification. And what a cavern is you're allowed to go anywhere inside the cave that you can still see ambient light. So you want to be able to still see daylight somewhere visual. So that's your escape route. So cave diving is an overhead environment, totally different than diving in the ocean. Your equipment should be much more streamlined. Gases are different. People don't dive with helium in caves. They'll dive with argon because it has more warming properties in it, in the water, to keep their dry suit warm inside, and the helium keeps it going. There's all sorts of different things. And these are the people that spend 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 hours and like eat underwater, drink underwater. Like they actually do that. And it's some pretty extreme stuff. I love reading about it and I love watching the movies, and but I just I just wonder of all the stress those things they put their body through, and the long-term stuff. So I know with me that in the 21 years that I've been diving, I certainly can't do the things that I did 20 years ago. I think I can, but I'll tell you the one thing that I've learned through all the diving that I've done is the best way to approach a dive is to think slow, think sleepy. I don't mean tired sleepy, but just think everything slow, because when you're underwater, you burn 3 to 5 times the amount of energy as you do on land to do the same thing because of the resistance of water. So when I first dove, I would get in and I would, on a 3,000 PSI tank, I would get 35 or 40 minutes out of a tank. I'm up to maybe 65, 70 minutes I can get now by slowing my breathing down, slowing my body function. I don't have to kick my fins like this to get over to that big fish, because that's what I did for probably the first 100 dives. I was just so excited, and but if you think slow, think slippery, think sleepy. And those are words I stole out of a diving magazine, but yeah, those were, just slow yourself down and you enjoy the dive a lot better and you see more. So, yeah, Sherry, you mentioned Rotan earlier. I remember the first dive that the shark dive that I did at Rotan, and I believe it's Coxon Hole I had to go down to and take the dive boat out. And there was 6 or 7 divers on the boat and 2 or 3 dive masters. And the boat went flying out, and they had 2 or 3 5-gallon buckets on the boat, and they're filled with fish chum. So as the boat's going, the boat didn't even stop. One diver grabbed 2 buckets and jumped out of the boat. And what he was doing, figured out afterward, he was creating a trail of descent under the water to attract the sharks. So we went a couple 100 yards more, and he's still swimming under the water, I guess, and they drop us off. And yeah, I'm not a big fan of attracting the sharks. When I did that, that was one of the most exciting things that I did, but to see them you know, on how they congregate, because in no time at all, we had 30, 40 sharks swimming around us. And I've got like 10 minutes of video and they're bumping into me and everything. It was just so, it was awesome. And they were just Caribbean reef sharks. They weren't, you know, they're like squirrels under the sea or raccoons. That's what I saw. It's just, you don't want to run into a great white or a tiger shark. All the other sharks are fine. So they swim away from you, usually. So, you know, you know, sharks are one thing and the big animals are great, but I found the last few times that I've dove looking for the macro stuff, and you know, I've got a couple of different dive cameras, and I like to get in close, if you know, and to see the reefs and to see if I can find the spider crabs or the brittle stars or you know, the baby barracuda, those types of things. So it's almost like a total contrast from, and you know, then you look up and a 6 foot wide eagle ray flies over top of you while you're looking at a 1 inch animal. And I'm just so I never want to come back out of the water when I'm underneath the water. It just it leaves me wanting more all the time. You know, there's a wreck that we have here in Kempenfelt Bay in Barrie, and I've been out to it a few times, the J.C. Montgomery. And every year that you dive it tends to be a little bit different because of the way that the ice comes in. It's only in about 25 feet of water, so sand pushes up and you might see the hull. The next year, 1 year, we couldn't see any of it. Well, there's one piece of wood sticking out. So the wreck has been down there for, I believe it's about 106, 107 years, something like that. So there's not a lot to it, but there are some pictures online that show you some better pictures for what it used to look like anyway. So but probably the one of the scariest things that ever happened to me diving was within the first couple of years after I got or started diving. My mom has a place on the water in Carthew Bay up in Aurelia, and I went up with my son and we put our dive equipment on, and it was early June, mid-June, something like that. And we're going out into the water, and I would see all these huge bass, you know, large bass swimming around. And anyways, I come up to this area that I looked all hazy and I wasn't quite sure. Well, turns out it was a nesting area. I had 2 or 3 bass attack me for getting too close to their area. They were bumping my goggles. So, you know, I've never, in all the Caribbean dives that I've had, and I've never ever had that happen. And it happened in Lake Simcoe and Aurelia. So I had those. So, and I, you know, and I reflect, it kind of freaked me out when that happened, but I reflect back on it now as I'm in their environment and I got a little bit too close. I was too curious. And it was just them, you know, to protect the environment. Bass are bad. So, I guess in terms of scuba diving, well, I think when I started it, it was just the sport was just coming into its own in 1999, 2000. Scuba diving, they've been certifying divers since the early 60s when Jacques Cousteau first made it really popular. And but there was never any real rigid agencies or certification agencies until really the mid to late late 80s when Patty and a couple of Nowie came along, those dive agencies. And, you know, today there's, you know, it's like I said, I don't want anybody to even reflect back on what I said and the training that I took in the beginning, because there's a lot of Discover Scuba courses that can go out and they'll take you, you know, you'll spend an hour or two in the pool at a Caribbean resort or something like that. And then, you know, they'll take you on a dive. That's one thing, but to go on anything more than 20 or 25 feet deep without hours of technical training, you're certainly, it's a money grab in my eyes by the scuba agency at the resorts. And I tend to not go near those resorts. I try to stay away from them for sure. So, it becomes down to money at that point. To me, I think it's to me, it's a very safe sport. It sort of changed my perspective on anything to do with the environment. I find myself, even a week and a half ago, we have a place up in Honey Harbor, and I was up there and I noticed a turtle going across the road. Well, I've already got my shovel in the truck for lifting the turtles across the road, because I know that time of year is coming. And, I never used to think that like that. And, I was 33, 34 when I got certified. If I had got certified in my early 20s or late teens, I probably wouldn't have any kids. I'd be a dive master and I'd live in the Caribbean somewhere. So that's sort of how I look at diving, what it could have done to my life. And even for the first couple of years, I contemplated about doing. I think when people get excited, and especially into diving, a lot of them figure they want to do as much as they can. And it's such a fun sport. And just to go back and tell you a little bit about what happened to my wife. He did a dive on the second day after we got to Cozumel in, I think it was 2008 or 2009. And she came up out of the water and she said her back hurt. And so she didn't do the next dive. And anything that I had read about decompression sickness was something with somebody coming from great depth and coming fast to the surface, which none of that happened. And we only did a 40 or 50 foot dive or something like that. Spent about 35 minutes underwater, 40 minutes. And it wasn't until 3 or 4 days later, she couldn't walk anymore. And so we ended up going to the hospital in Cozumel, and within about 10 minutes, the doctor was putting her into the recompression chamber after I talked to him about what had happened. And within 20 minutes of being in the chamber, she was fine because they had taken her down to 90 or 100 feet deep. So like anything, the reason I tell this story, I'm telling both sides of it, there is an inherent risk in it. And he didn't do anything wrong, nothing whatsoever wrong. And the dive doctor said that it's just one of those things that can happen. And he's cleared to dive again, and she doesn't want to. I think she'd like to, but she's become too apprehensive because of it. So it wasn't a good experience for her to spend that. I don't know if anybody seen a recompression chamber, but it's basically a big propane tank that you sit inside, and a nurse actually sat inside her for the 17 or 18 hours that she was in there over the course of a couple of days. Yeah, after to administer oxygen and that type of thing. So.
To learn more about CNIB Lake Joe at-home programs, visit CNIBLakeJoe.ca.